Before the sublime mystery of life and spirit, the mystery of infinite space and endless time, we stand in reverent awe. This much we know. We are at least one phase of the immortality of life. The mighty stream of life flows on, and in this mighty stream, we too flow on, not lost, but each eternally significant. For this I feel, the spirit never betrays the person who trusts it. Physical life may be defeated, but life goes on, character survives, goodness lives, and love is immortal. May we join our hearts now in reverent gratitude for those whose lives have blessed ours and who have gone from the struggle of human existence to the everlasting peace of heaven. We name them now silently from where we are to join in spiritual communion with them on this All Souls Sunday. We remember them. They are part of us. They live on in our continued relationship with them as we glean wisdom from this connection. Some hard lessons, some beautiful ones, some complicated memories, some simply delightful. May their names be spoken among us comfortably, as if they are just in the next room, and may love make the veil between the living and the dead gossamer and gentle. God bless them all, and us, and may the fact of our mortality lead us to treasure life and those with whom we share it ever more deeply. Amen.
Stell auf den Tisch die duftenden Reseden, die letzten roten Asken trag herbei, und lass uns wieder von der Liebe reden, wie einst im Mai. Gib mir die Hand, dass ich sie heimlich drücke, und wenn man sie sieht, mir ist es einerlei. gib mir nur einen, deine süßen Blicke, wie einst im Mai. Es blüht und duftet heut auf jedem Grabe. Ein Tag im Jahr ist ja den Toten frei. Komm an mein Herz, dass ich dich wieder habe, wie einst im Mai. Wie einst im Mai.
John Murray was the father of American Universalism. And this past September 30th, we celebrated the 250th anniversary of his arrival to the shores of America and the date on which he preached his first sermon. So John Murray was born in 1741 in England, right on the eve of the Enlightenment era. And he was a disciple of this very charismatic kind of rock star evangelical preacher named George Whitefield, who actually made a few preaching circuits of America, even though he was English. And John Murray was raised in a very strict Calvinist environment by a domineering, abusive father. And so he left home at 17 after his dad's early death to join Whitefield's corps of preachers. It was kind of like a traveling show, if you will. One day, John Murray was sent to convert a young woman who'd been influenced by the theology of a guy named James Raleigh, who's preaching universalism and teaching universal salvation. So John Murray went to convert this young woman, whose name is unfortunately lost to history, but she ended up converting him. And then he ended up reading Raleigh's very famous pamphlet called Union and began to attend James Raleigh's church in London. This did not go over well with John Murray's Calvinist Methodist community, and he was actually kicked out of that church. He had married by now. He married a woman named Eliza Neal, and so he and Eliza together became very persuaded of the truth of Raleigh's message, and they joined the church. And meanwhile, James Raleigh's book had jumped the Atlantic, and a bootleg copy was being studied by a book group in Gloucester. So those of us who have been doing a book group together as a church, you know, this is a very, very old practice. John Murray's life became very, very tragic. He lost a 1-year-old son after a long illness. The baby had a long illness. And then his wife, Eliza, who was very, very adversely affected by the death of her son, lost her health. And John Murray moved them out of the city and ended up spending every penny that they had to try to provide medical care to Eliza, who subsequently died anyway. So there is John Murray, and he is bereft. He is he's sent to debtor's prison. And his brother ends up coming eventually and getting him out of there. But John Murray he's just devastated. He really can't function. He's lost everything. He's penniless. And he contemplates suicide. And he decides that that is something he cannot do. And so what he does is he decides he's going to go to America and just lose himself. He's not going to preach anymore. He's just going to kind of reinvent himself, which is something that people did all the time in coming to America. What happens next is really remarkable. And I'm just going to read this story from the Harvard Archives. Okay. So in July 1770, John Murray sailed for the New World. Before they arrived, he was heading for Philadelphia. The ship became stuck on a sandbar on the southern New Jersey coast near Cranberry Inlet, in a place later called Good Luck Point. You'll see why in a moment. Going ashore, Murray met a man, a farmer, an illiterate farmer who had learned the Bible through through verbal means, named Thomas Potter. And this is a true story. Thomas Potter explained to John Murray that he had actually built his own chapel in the hope, in the faithful expectation that God was going to send him a preacher who would declare that all people were meant to be saved. In other words, Thomas Potter had become acquainted with Universalist theology, and he had actually been praying for a preacher of Universalism to be provided to him by providence. And so here is John Murray walking across the field. I'm not making this up. I know that if this was a movie, we'd all go, yeah, right. And it's true. So Murray admitted to Potter that he had preached. And so Potter said, you're the guy. You're the man God sent to fill my pulpit. Murray said, nope, not me. I am never going to preach again. So here's what Potter did. He struck an agreement. He said, if the winds didn't change and the ship remained stuck on the sandbar, then it would be a sign from God that Murray was indeed meant to preach there in Thomas Potter's chapel. But if the winds did change, Murray could, go on his merry way. It had been 2 days, but by Sunday morning, the winds had not changed. And Murray, keeping the agreement, believing that it was a sign from God, preached the first Universalist sermon in America 250 years ago, September 30th. So after this, Murray begins to get his life force back. And he ends up leaving, which is a shame because Thomas Potter certainly had hoped that he would stay. But John Murray goes on a circuit tour, and he becomes, in his own way, a kind of a rock star. He's a very compelling guy, kind of rough around the edges, but he's young, and he's preaching something that's really exciting and shaking people up. And he ends up going to Gloucester, where, as you may remember, they had been studying James Relly's Universal Salvation work. And so they are thrilled to get John Murray in the house, if you will, and they start the first Universalist church in America. And it is still there. And it is still an active congregation. John Murray marries one of his parishioners who actually ends up becoming much more historically famous than him. You may have heard of Judith Sargent Murray. And you may have gone to the exhibit at the Cape Ann Museum that was all about her recently. But the story doesn't have a particularly happy ending. John Murray had a stroke, and he eventually died after many, many years of being an invalid. He never had a retirement. He didn't get peaceful years to enjoy his life free of work or free of financial hardship. But what we do know is that he lived and he died in the hope expressed in Paul's letter to the Hebrews, which I'd like to read some of right now. God is not unjust. He will not forget your work and the love you have shown as you have helped God's people and continue to help them. We want each of you to show this same diligence to the very end so that what you hope for may be fully realized. God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised. He confirmed it with an oath. God did this so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled to take hold of the hope set before us may be greatly encouraged. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. So the anchor, therefore, is the symbol of universalism. And it seems really poetically resonant to me that the first Universalist church in America would be located in a coastal town populated by those who make their living upon the sea. The anchor looks right at home there in Gloucester. The truth is, Murray was one of the early influencers of Universalism in America, but his own theological ideas actually did not live much beyond his own lifetime. Universalism was an idea whose time had come, and it grew and it spread, not because of one charismatic or powerful figure, but because it kept propagating itself like cuttings taken from a healthy plant, gifted around to lots of enthusiastic gardeners. Universalism doesn't really have one founder. It kept popping up in various places and subsequent eras and in different denominations, moving like holy wisdom through the streets and through the human mind. So it occurs to me that perhaps what we need more from John Murray than his theology is really his story. He's really relatable, wanting to escape an abusive parent, having a youthful certainty about metaphysical truths, and then being shaken out of that belief, entering into a transformational search for truth and meaning, and having that search come at a high, high cost. Becoming bankrupted by medical bills. Boy, is that relevant. Not being able to function after a terrible personal loss. Living in a society that criminalized poverty. Wanting to escape, first through death, and then through a total reinvention of self. Being thrown back by what feels like a cosmic joke first, and then like a beautiful miracle, to what is essential in the self, the gifts of the self. And that's what Thomas Potter, of course, did for him. I think, and I certainly hope, that the foundational faith claims of Universalism, that love and creativity and not judgment and punishment are at the heart of reality, is unquestioned and easy for all of you. It may trouble you, as it often does me, that there are still so many people that insist that there is a great punisher ruling the universe. I often wonder why so many people hold this belief. And I think that it may be not just because they were taught it, but because they essentially experience life as a competition and a zero-sum game. And this is reflected in their theology. They are ungenerous and greedy and project those qualities onto their deity. They have a scarcity mentality, or they are overreigned by fear and anxiety, existential anxiety. And this leads them to see their Creator's love as limited and extended only to some. It's a very, very painful belief to have at the center of your being. It leads to a lot of suffering, a lot of emotional and spiritual suffering, and to a lot of hateful behavior too. So today, what I encourage you to especially embrace as Universalists is not just the good news that love is not in limited supply on the earth and in the heavens, but to consider this. We are in a moment of time, much as was John Murray on his voyage to Philadelphia in 1770, weary and worried. Our nation and the world have suffered hundreds of thousands of deaths and have been beaten in many ways. We hope for fresh possibility this week, but we cannot predict the outcome of what is coming. So who and where are the Thomas Potters in our world who have built a chapel to proclaim the love of God and the salvation and belovedness of all human beings, who may have been waiting for us, for you, for me, to come ashore and build the beloved community with them and to preach the message of love, not just with our words, but with our lives. Where is Universalism springing up and growing now? Where are the fresh cuttings emerging and growing? Where is it sending out its shoots and looking for good soil to root in? It isn't within any denomination or within any one institution, but within people's hearts, within actions, within movements, within words, within your presence. Think on this inheritance, that we are anchored in hope. Think on this amazing story, that out of total despair and brokenness, there can be an embrace and a welcome from a world that says, I've been waiting just for you. Yes, you. Think on your role in this continuation. Think that one day you will take your place in this story as an ancestor spirit. And think about how you will be remembered for having spent your life anchored by hope and in the service of love. Our words for sending forth this morning are by John Murray. Go out into the highways and byways. Give the people something of your new vision. You may possess a small light, but uncover it, let it shine. Use it in order to bring more light and understanding to the hearts and minds of all. Give them not hell, but hope and courage. Preach the kindness and everlasting love of God. Today's worship team was Kenneth Griffith, Steve DeVoe, Misha Gerson, Francine Amari Faulkner, David Collins, and the UUCGL Choir. And together, all of us are the church. Now, let us join in our closing hymn. We are the earth upright and proud.